Welcome to the Clearly Christian Podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. It's time to know more so you can say no more. It's time for the Clearly Christian Podcast. Here's your host, Dr. Cy Smith.
I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this is Clearly Christian, a podcast about what it means to see the world from God's perspective and the impact this has on training the next generation to live a life consistent with the biblical worldview. If you've been listening, you like what you hear, I hope you will hit the subscribe button or leave a review. That'll let others know the show is worth listening to and checking out, and it'll help us spread the word and serve our mission to make a difference. So again, thank you for being here and helping us advance the cause of Christian education. Today's extra credit version of the Clearly Christian podcast is a deeper dive into my recent conversation with Dr. Tyler Groves. He's the head of school at Whitfield Christian Academy in Louisville, Kentucky. So the podcast is now live. So if you see that or you're interested in listening, just look for the picture of Dr. Groves and you'll find everything you need there. And again, we were talking about social and emotional learning. So let's go ahead and bring in our show producer, Brian Lefelock. And Brian, what'd you think about the show, and what questions do you have as a follow-up that our authors or our listeners might be interested in hearing?
The show is tremendous, Dr. Smith, and I hope that people will watch his knowledge, Tyler's knowledge of the subject matter. And, of course, he wrote the book. Just amazing. What a wealth of information and helpful from a parent's point of view to kind of know what's going on out there. One of the things that I was interested in right from the beginning, you guys talked a lot about SEL. Help me as a parent to understand, what is that? How did it happen? What just like a 10-year-old, what's going on there?
Yeah, that's a great question because we didn't have time to probably dig into that as deep as we would have liked, and I kind of alluded to it in the introduction, but it probably needs pulled out. And even for preparation for this episode, I wanted to go back and do a little bit more reading because really we are talking about a change in culture that really led to this. And of course, we have a tendency in this country to react to certain things, right? And so as we saw, just to give you a brief history, but as we saw test scores going the wrong direction, we said, okay, we've got to put more time and effort into test scores. And so we came up with, as I said, the No Child Left Behind Act in the early 2000s. And we said, boy, we've got to have more focused time for reading and writing and math, especially because our national test scores were so bad in those areas. And then, of course, others naturally said, man, we're leaving out the bigger picture, a more holistic education. We're ignoring helping these kids grow and mature and blah, blah, blah. And they need that in this day and age. And traditionally, those things had been largely left to the culture and the parents and things like that. But as society changed, we found that we needed to do more of that formal introduction at school. At least a lot of people thought that was the case. And so they said, all right, let's pull out social and emotional learning like it's a curricular piece. And that's really where the change came from, to say, let's put that stuff in writing. I think I called it a domain in my introduction and said, let's package this idea that you can teach grit, you can teach empathy, you can teach self-awareness and relational skills, and we can actually teach kids how to make responsible decisions. Again, we weren't packaging that before in education. Now we had a package, and we called it SEL. And it sounded good. And again, it was in response to the big national testing movement because they said, hey, we're ignoring what it means to be a whole person, right? We want well-rounded kids. We want kids who are mature and blah, blah, blah. And if we just focus on test scores, we aren't going to get these well-rounded kids. So we've got to have kids who can be productive members of society. So let's come up with a package that teachers can actually teach. And let's make it not just integrated, let's pull it out and make it part of this new curriculum. So it had some good intentions, perhaps, as a result of the culture. It went obviously too far, but then as I talk about in the podcast, that's really where we got in trouble because now, like every curricular package, whose values get to determine what's going to be in the content. And if you leave God out, you're left with a new content that is not designed from God's perspective. So here now you are talking to kids about deep emotional things and psychological things, and you've left God out. So that's why we talk about, hey, you can't talk about this stuff without God because you're talking about what it means to be human. Why should I be a responsible decision maker? who are you to tell me what's a responsible decision? If I want to change genders, I should be allowed to change genders. Somebody's got to step in and say, whoa, no. That is wrong. Well, why is it wrong? Well, because you are made in the image of God. What does God have to do with anything? He's never been part of my curriculum before. Why is he a part of it now? So this just led to a whole host of problems for SEL, and it just really got itself into trouble.
Wow. Okay. So that does make sense. And it leads then to the next question, because in your show, you and Dr. Groves talked a lot about self-awareness, and it got me thinking, talking about, hey, what's good for me is good for me. And that's the idea, I think, behind SEL. Let's make sure kids are good for them, that kind of thing. The golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, is something I've never heard anybody argue, like secular anywhere. That's just the rule. And yet, it feels like now we're going against the golden rule. It's not about do unto others. It's take care of yourself first. And that's not right. Talk to me more about that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that whole idea that you are first, and he mentioned it too, it's a whole different way of looking at things that, hey, as long as you're happy, then everything else is good. And that's completely opposite of, what, like you said, even the golden rule that we don't tend to argue, because we know this goes against how life works. And, Dr. Groves and I would both say as believers, the reason why this doesn't make sense to us is because you weren't wired that way. You were created to be like your creator, who didn't wire you that way. He wired you to look out for others and do unto others as you would have done unto you. And so it just makes sense to us that, hey, yeah, I should treat other people like I treat myself, and I want to be treated, and blah, blah, blah. And so when I look after others in that way, it just seems to make sense. If I say, you know what, I am going to just pursue what makes me happy, and everybody else can just deal with it and let the results fall where they may. Well, it's not only harmful to you, but it's harmful to others. It doesn't lead to a very meaningful life. It's not very fulfilling. We care what other people think of us. It just makes sense. And we're not trying to just be vain in that. We know that's a part of being human. I have a relationship with Brian, and I want Brian to know that I care about him. He cares about me, and I value him. He values me. There's a give and take there, of course, and I want him to know that. And that just seems to make sense to us. But SEL, as you say, hey, find your authentic self. Well, if my authentic self says, you know what, I'm denying how God made me, I'm denying what other people think about me, I don't care what other people think about me, I am in the pursuit of me, myself, and I. Boy, eventually that runs its course, and you are not a happy person.
One of the things that Dr. Gross talked about at the end was what parents could do, what teachers can do within their own environments, because you can do what you can do in a Christian school within the limits. Like, there's still government pressures and things for SEL. You still have to do that. But public school can't. Can you dig deeper into, how will that change? It needs to change. The golden rule is not going away, and so they're just going to keep on fighting. How can that change on a global perspective moving forward, do you think?
Yeah, I think we have to, and he touched on it, and, he and I both as Christian educators, we certainly don't want to come across as experts on how to tell public educators, how to do their job and things like that. But he certainly trusts us. We have to just keep kind of teaching and talking the truth on a national level, and I think that's what's starting to happen is now, and of course, if you watch some of the commentators, they'll call it, hey, this is common sense. We want to return to common sense, right? That's kind of the new phrase that everybody's talking about. Well, we would probably, call it whatever you want, but we would say the reason why it's common sense is because it's true. It just makes good sense to you. Like you said, the golden rule and things like that. And so hopefully we can kind of keep using that language where the world will start to see, and the bigger culture will see, this isn't a Christian thing. This is a human thing. This makes common sense to us as humans. And again, as Christians, we say, why? Because you were made in God's image. You can deny it all you want, but he's your creator. That's why it's common sense.
It always comes back to that, doesn't it?
It sure does.
Dr. Smith, when I grew up, we had a counselor, guidance counselor, like you mentioned. They took care of making sure you went to college. If you wanted to go to college, what your options were. Are you going to graduate with enough credits? That's what the guidance counselor did. And I know the world has changed. We can't argue that things are different, and that's a whole separate topic. In fact, it's probably what Clearly Christian podcast has been all about.
Right.
But you mentioned even in your schools, you now have multiple counselors and multiple support teams taking care of kids with multiple needs that maybe we didn't do back then. Is that real? Are you taking care of a government influence? Are we really there that's what you have to do to take best care of kids?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is probably the new reality. And we tell our parents that all the time. Listen, the culture is stronger than you think. And you may, your kid's raised in a Christian home, and you may be going to church as regularly as you possibly can as well, and you're even sending your children to a Christian school. You're doing everything you should the right way. Does that mean your children will be immune from the cultural pressures which are driving these SEL issues? No. You just cannot ignore it, because everywhere they look outside of home, church, and school, the culture is saying something that's opposite to what we believe. And that is so true, right? I mean, we're talking that, biology is fixed, and the culture is saying, no, it's fluid. And we're saying that, God designed the world in, 6 days and rested on the 7. No, it's evolution. We're saying, God has this plan for all of history. It's his story. The world is saying, no, it's about you. Everywhere these kids look, nothing reinforces what they're learning at home, church, and the Christian school. So there's a constant tension in their life. They're constantly doing this social and emotional battle with what they see as the world and what they know is their own Christian faith. And it's like he said, it's a process. They have to work that out. They're wrestling to understand that. And it's hard for them. It's just a different day and age, and they have to really work through some of these things, because I can't remember what the exact quote is, but it's something to the effect that the heroes of old used to be these noble people who did noble things. Now the heroes of today are movie stars and actors and songwriters and things like that. So kids really revere what it is they're hearing. So the generations and the times have certainly changed. Well, thank you again for listening, and thank you again, Brian, for good questions. And I hope that, again, now you know more about Christian education, social and emotional learning from a biblical perspective or a biblical worldview. Thank you for following along. Thank you for listening. And remember, the only way we're going to turn things around in our country is to increase the number of people who hold a biblical worldview and see things from God's perspective. So our greatest hope to get there is Christian education. Again, I'm Dr. Cy Smith, and this has been Clearly Christian.
Thank you for listening to the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith. Hear more episodes at clearlychristianeducation.com. If you'd like more information about Christian education in your neighborhood, or if you're interested in education opportunities at Mansfield Christian School, or if you agree with Dr. Smith and want to help him in his mission to influence and awaken Christian America, you can send Dr. Smith an email through the clearlychristianeducation.com website. Message him on the Clearly Christian LinkedIn or Facebook page, or call the Clearly Christian Connection line at 419-756-5651. This has been the Clearly Christian podcast with Dr. Cy Smith on clearlychristianeducation.com, brought to you in conjunction with Mansfield Christian School, a Bryan Media production.